Marty Grenzer, manager of the National Good Food Network.
Thanks, Jeff. Hello, everyone. My name is Marty Grenzer, and I'm manager of the National Good Food Network with the Wallace Center and with advisors from around the country. Now, Jeff, are the slides up? Just wanted to run through a little bit about the Good Food Network. There we go. The National Good Food Network emerged with many discussions and collaborations with food systems leaders from all around the nation. You probably know many of them. We together identified a need for a national coordinating organization, one that could assist our regions in building regional food systems through what we call a values-based value chain supply network. The Wallace Center's focus on market-based solutions to move more good food into the mainstream food system has proven to be a good place to house the NGFN. That's why we call it the Wallace Center National Good Food Network. We're very proud of the work that our partners have done with farmers markets, CSAs, and direct sales around this country. However, the NGFN focuses on small and medium-sized growers interested in scaling up into larger markets. We believe this is one way to make our good food and move more good food into the mainstream, which leads to small and medium-sized grower viability, increases the vitality of our rural and urban areas, and ultimately reaches our children and families where they live and where they eat food, in our schools and in their communities. The Wallace Center and food systems leaders from all around the nation have come together in building this NGFN and regional networks, and we have found some great momentum in building toward a new, more sustainable food system. This is what we call the National Good Food Network. The NGFN serves as what we call a networking, communications, and information hub for people, knowledge, and funders. At our site at ngfn.org, for instance, we have a growing number of people who have entered their name and information into our database, and it's proving to be a good networking location. We encourage you to put your name, get your information out there after this webinar if you haven't done so already. The network also serves to stimulate on-the-ground projects that we call boots on the ground, actually getting some of the work done. You can find a link at ngfn.org to some of the projects that we've been able to document already. The objectives of the NGFN are to create connection, knowledge, and community. At the national level, we work to connect people to people, experts in food systems work, people to knowledge, and people to sources of national and regional funding. This webinar is one way that we communicate that information. And we also want to build community. We want to help our folks continually see more good food in their communities. We're partners and collaborators with other national networks, the National Farm to School Network, School Food Focus, Community Food Security Coalition, and National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition are some of the networks that we collaborate with, and we feel like we've been able to move more work forward through an integrated collaborative approach than if we would have done this by ourselves in siloed approaches. And this webinar today is one example of Community Food Security Coalition and the NGFN coming together to do a joint webinar for you all. The network map looks like this. The Wallace Center and the advisors have guided the work of the network as a whole, and you'll see on the left we have 10 regional teams distributed throughout the country. Each of the teams are well-connected hubs of good food work in their regions. We also have a significant amount of work going on through what we call national coordination with the Wallace Center staff and key consultants. This webinar is an example of some of the work going on from the national level. We also have a food safety subcommittee that meets once a month, and we invite you to learn more about that on ngfn.org. We have partnerships established with the public sector and with other nonprofits. Our advisory council is listed on the screen now. We feel our group is a wonderful group of deep thinkers, experienced practitioners, and they have helped to concept and build this National Good Food Network. The next screen will show you our regional lead teams. We have 11 regional teams that we work with around the country. You may know many of them. Their contact information and links to their websites can be found on ngfn.org. And the last map that you'll see, as soon as the screen advances here, there it is. The map shows where we work throughout the country. Our regional lead teams, our advisors, and key partners are working in regional food systems initiatives throughout the country and connected to other pods of activity that many of you may be working on as well. The goals of the NGFN are listed here. We're focused on, and in the first goal, which we call supply meeting demand, where we're focused on working with what we call institutional buyers, scaled up buyers that can help us move more good food into the mainstream food system and help the supply meet the demand for this good food. The second goal is what we call our information hub, where we would like to be thought of as one go-to place for regional food system stories, methods, and outcomes, and to really provide you with some good stories from other regions around the country. The third goal is focused on giving policymakers the information they need to make good decisions based on NGFN work and other work of our regional food systems folks from around the country. And we're working hard to make all of these goals happen. So that's the NGFN. Feel free to contact us anytime at contact@ngfn.org. And now Jeff Fardman will introduce our speakers. Thank you all for being on the call today.
So now let me introduce Kolu Zigbi. Kolu joined the Jessie Smith Noyes Foundation in 2000 and is responsible for grants supporting organizations and networks engaging in leadership development, organizing, and advocacy for more sustainable agriculture and food systems. An active member of the Sustainable Agriculture and Food Systems Funders Group, Kolu co-chaired its steering committee in 2005 and 2006, as well as the committee which planned its 2009 annual forum. She also served on the 2008 Conference Planning Committee of the Environmental Grantmakers Association. Kolu is a member of Philanthropy New York and recently organizing 3 funder briefings exploring the New York City Fresh Initiative, FoodWorks New York, a comprehensive set of reforms and recommendations emerging from the City Council, and For the Record, Measuring Diversity, organized through the Increasing Diversity in Philanthropy Committee. She co-authored an article published last fall at the Foundation Review entitled Setting the Table for a Sustainable and Just Food System, which describes evaluation findings from a 3-year initiative she managed to build the advocacy capacity of 10 people of color-led organizations addressing a wide range of food policy issues. Kolu's education includes a 1999 to 2000 Charles H. Rebson Fellowship at Columbia University, graduate study in city and regional planning at Cornell, and undergraduate degrees from Stanford University. Kolu.
Hi, thanks, Jeff. Hi, everyone. So first, I hope that the farmers and retailers, wholesalers, and planners listening in on this call will be able to translate the lessons that I've learned working with nonprofit organizations into your respective realms. So what Karen, Owen, and Diana all described is a lot more than reaching out to new communities. They're talking about building community control, train the trainers, participatory design process, movement building, and vision. So we're discussing linking diverse communities through healthy food, recognizing that doing this effectively takes work. That's why you got on this call, because you know that it doesn't just happen. It requires actively overcoming barriers that keep communities apart. So the first question is, why partner? When you dedicate energy to something, you have to be clear about why. Your personal reasons for doing this work are not the same as your organization's, and it's important to be clear about your organization's motivation to link with diverse communities. Because it's the right thing to do is not a good answer. Because I like working in a multicultural environment is also not a good answer in my opinion. Because they need our help is also not a good answer, and in fact it's presumptuous and likely to earn you resentment. The single most important answer to the question of why your organization should link with diverse communities is, let's see if this slide advances, to achieve your mission. As a funder, my experience is that being clear about your organizational self-interest helps to ensure commitment and success. When your organization, and I mean board, staff, and members, understands that a course of action will help achieve mission, then adequate planning and evaluation are more likely to happen. This means making sure your organization's board of directors has spent time exploring why you need to link and who you need to partner with in order to reach your goal. If you go to your board and say, you know, we're a mostly white university sitting on a hill, we need to go down in the valley and serve the non-white people there, your organizational self-interest is not in focus. You'll fail in your efforts because you're starting out all wrong. But if you say, we're an all-white university sitting on a hill that could be learning a great deal from the real-life experiences of folks living in the valley, and by partnering, we could provide internships and research experiences for our professors and our students, you'll be off to a much better start. So then your organization can ask, which institutions in the valley, which partners in the valley should we be reaching out to? And you might have a variety of answers. It could be membership organizations. It could be a dynamic local political leader. It could be institutions like hospitals. And it's important to acknowledge that minority-led businesses and organizations also have to ask these same questions. So if you're an African-American-led college or university on a hill, and you may have a mixed multicultural community down in that valley, you know, you have to go through that same process. This doesn't only apply to white organizations reaching out to people of color communities. So the next step is having to think about your prospective partner. How are they perceived? Do you understand their mission, their capacity, their reputation? And key would be whether that organization or entity's values align closely with yours. And remember that that entity has a self-interest as well. And they also have to be motivated through their own organizational self-interest to join with you. So for example, if your interest is in starting community gardens, their interest may be public safety, or it may be stabilizing property values. And understanding that will help you understand how to speak in a language and deliver a message that's going to motivate them. So going to them and saying, hey, we could produce a lot of food, if their interest is property values, might not be the most effective message. So you need to understand your mission, producing food, but also understand the message that's going to motivate the partner that you're seeking to work with. So the question is, why are you linking? What's your motivation? Are you linking to broaden your base of support? Organizations might strengthen their relationship with diverse communities in order to grow their membership base. And for some people on this call, that might translate as customers. Groups who do this successfully reach the communities they want to attract and put together a well-thought-out recruitment strategy. They might hire new staff from the community. They might expand the scope of their work to include issues or products important to that community. They may need to invest in translators and translation equipment to ensure that non-English speakers feel welcome and able to participate. So growing your base can benefit your organization by continuing its relevance even as community demographics may shift. or making more efficient use of your organization's underutilized capacity, or earning your organization more sales or dues, attracting new donors, etc. Again, the key is to understand that your organization should have an interest. Are you linking with diverse communities in order to increase your organization's political clout? Okay, you may see a need to affect some policy change. Linking with diverse communities is a powerful way to boost your organization's advocacy impact. Elected officials and policymakers are impressed when diverse groups find common ground over a policy concern, because it suggests that the issue being addressed has broad support. And if a strong coalition is important to advancing your advocacy agenda, put time and resources into the front end of the process to ensure that under-resourced groups that are part of your coalition are empowered to participate fully. That might mean finding resources to compensate staff, scheduling meetings when your partners are most likely to be able to attend, and locating meetings in accessible areas. It's really pragmatic, kind of mundane things, but at the end of the day, they're important. Are you linking with diverse communities in order to cultivate new leadership? Your organization or company's self-interest might be to ensure that it has a future, that it has emerging and secondary leaders that can bring it into the future. And you might find that you don't have that next level of leadership, and ask yourself if you're communicating your mission in a way that resonates with diverse communities so that new people want to get involved as leaders. And if you're not attracting new people, or the people that you want to reach, consider creating targeted messages. Right? You might have a great mission, but it just might not be resonating. And a targeted message can powerfully demonstrate that you understand and respect different audiences. Are you linking in order to gain legitimacy and trust? Even if your organization doesn't need new leaders, greater political clout, or new members, you need legitimacy and trust to carry out your business. If you've opened up a shop in a new community, or if you've been in the community but the demographics have shifted around you, you may need to reach out and create linkages with respected community leaders in order for folks to feel comfortable even walking through your doors. So think about how you can win over people who are trusted in the community. Let them know that you want community members to feel comfortable with your organization. When you identify a trusted leader, have lunch with them. Be transparent. Say, I think that if you come to understand what we're about or how we've changed, you'll appreciate us and others are likely to follow your lead. It's pretty basic stuff, I know, but sometimes when we get caught up in doing our work, we forget the basics. And an important one is recognizing that diverse communities have resources, and linking to diverse communities may be a way to gain access to new resources. That's important, and it's okay. Even if a community is underserved, it still contains entities that have resources. It has community members that could influence whether your organization is able to obtain vacant land, get a zoning exception approved, or win funding from a government program. And another resource that communities have is information. Link to other service providers that you can refer people to. It'll make your organization more effective and efficient. For example, the Farmers Legal Action Group partners with the Association for the Advancement of Hmong Women in Minnesota. And a lot of Hmong Americans are involved in farming, either for their own consumption or for income. Because the Association for the Advancement of Hmong Women works with a lot of farmers, they reached out to FLAG, and FLAG partnered with them and won 2 USDA grants. One is a National Institute for Food and Agriculture grant that they're sharing. The two organizations are sharing 50-50, and that's unusual, but it's important because that is allowing the Hmong organization to hire a dedicated staff person who's going to work full-time with the farmers. So FLAG is going to have access to the farm and social service resources that the Association for Hmong American Women provides, and the association is going to have access to FLAG's lawyers who can give them representation. So there's a lot of different ways that you can partner. The linkages can be formal or informal, and the form of the partnership it's really going to depend on your goals. The key question is, when you link, are you ready for impact? Are you ready to expand leadership? Not only within your community, but within your organization as well. I think Karen was talking about this when she talked about the board of directors. And new leadership often leads to new practices. So as Karen was saying, when we invite people representing diverse communities to join our boards, it means we're open to changing the status quo. If nothing in our organization changes, it's likely that the diversity we achieved is merely window dressing. So a lot of people on this call are involved in farming and production, and one question is, why are we cultivating new leaders, new farmers, right? And I think there's recognition that that we need new farmers in order to have continued food production. The average age of the American farmers is close to retirement age. So we want to ensure that there are farmers to produce food sustainably into the future. But as we're doing this, as we're cultivating new immigrant, refugee, minority, youth, and women farmers, we have to ask ourselves, are we setting them up to fail? Are we supporting them within the context of a sinking ship, like rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic? Or are we encouraging diverse farmers to work with us to change the system of policies and power that favors large corporate producers over family farmers and fast food over wholesome meals? The answer to that question is really revealed in how we design our own organizations, our companies, and our programs. Some farmer training programs are giving trainees a voice in program governance. Some are supporting new farmers' civic participation and linking them to national advocacy organizations so that they can be part of the systemic change. At Noyes, we ask a lot of questions about governance, even when it comes to our own investments and voting our proxies as shareholders, because we think that organizations should be democratically controlled and that participation in organizational decision-making helps develop new leadership. When we fund, for example, an immigrant farming program, it's just as important to us that the trainees become activists and advocates and develop as leaders as they're becoming good farmers. In one early grant we provided, there was initially no vehicle for farmers to give input into the project design. So the project had an executive committee of mentor farmers and other folks with resources. But eventually, the farmers made it clear that they wanted a way to make suggestions and give grievances, et cetera. And also, on our end, we asked a lot of questions about why didn't that exist. And eventually, a farmer advisory council was established. Then the challenge was how to bring the executive committee and the farmer advisory committee together. The executive committee had a tradition of meeting in a certain location at a certain time, and it was inconvenient to the advisory council members. They preferred to meet in the community on the evenings or on the weekends. So those kind of problems sound minor, but you'd be surprised at how long they can sometimes take to resolve. And when they take too long to resolve, they can eat away at that trust and goodwill that you need to be successful. So it's important to anticipate those kind of challenges at the front end, and it'll make your life a lot easier. Our experience managing a 3-year initiative in partnership with the Kellogg Foundation that Jeff already mentioned was that people of color leaders were often pretty aggressively recruited to join boards and coalitions. However, they often felt that their voices weren't heard by the other leaders at those tables. The most positive experiences they had were with coalitions and associations that they joined either when they were first being initiated, when they were first being formed, or that had already agreed to prioritize the needs of specific underserved communities. So for example, a farm worker organization named CATA was involved in the creation of the Domestic Fair Trade Alliance from its inception, and was able to shape it so that the Domestic Fair Trade Alliance's board has significant farm worker representation. As a result, concern over the impact of policy positions on farm workers is a core principle of the Domestic Fair Trade Alliance. So that was a very positive experience for them, and now they're able, CATA members are able to dedicate their time and resources to participating in that association because they know that it's worth it for them. At the end of the day, we're inviting folks to join us as architects of a new sustainable and just food system. So another important question is, who is speaking out to policymakers? Sometimes I see a disconnect between the people working on the ground on projects like community gardens and the people advocating for policy change. We have to ask whether diversity is being achieved at all levels, or is it just around service delivery and community outreach? Are our partnerships engaging affected people in policy development and advocacy? Are our advocacy networks responsive to the agendas of diverse groups? You know, in the nonprofit realm where I work, policy work is usually advanced through alliances, networks, and coalitions. No one group is really powerful enough to push a policy agenda successfully. So the work of negotiating those coalition structures is really pretty time-consuming. And it's important, I think, for folks to understand that that's doubly true for people of color-led organizations whose issues might be seen as marginal to the wider group because they reflect minority interests. So imagine how hard it is. You first have to get your issue on the agenda of the coalition of your allies. But that in itself might be hard because your issue may be perceived as a minority issue. I'd also love to see more partnerships that ensure that advocates for policies that affect under-resourced communities are from those communities. And to do that, it's going to take long-term commitment, patience, and dedication to build that pipeline of leadership to support the success of advocates from their own communities. A 2008 report from the United States Census Bureau projects that non-Hispanic white people will no longer make up the majority of the U.S. population by 2042. For many, whether and how we partner boils down to how we view the future. Does your organization view this future as diminishing its power and resources, or enlarging it? Are we going to be more people fighting over crumbs from the table, or will we be more people baking the bread and serving it to our communities? Another question is, are you colorblind or are you inclusive? Lady Justice is supposed to be impartial, right? She doesn't look at the society that she serves. But I'm convinced that if we want diversity with equity, If we want justice, we can't rely on color blindness or class blindness or any other blindness, because being colorblind means ignoring the glaring fact that our systems, housing, financial, and food, are designed to reproduce a status quo that results in disparity. As, as food, business people, planners, and activists, it makes sense to partner with those most underserved by this current status quo. And those folks have the most stake in changing the system. So we have to educate ourselves about the iniquities in the structure that we're trying to change. And I have a little story and then another 2 slides, and then I'll finish up. One of the organizations that the Jessie Smith Noyes Foundation has supported for many years has a mission statement that espouses equality and has always had participation by Black and brown people, but realized that it lacked powerful leadership by people of color that was reflective of the geographic area that it served. Some leaders of color who had once been active had left the organization, and the few remaining ones were kind of facing burnout. At one point, the organization hoped for a simple solution. They wanted to create a leadership training program and get more people involved, more people of color in particular involved through that. And I asked them whether they knew why the problem even existed, but they didn't know the answer. How could they create an effective leadership development training program without knowing the answer to that question? Ultimately, they decided to begin by increasing the cultural competency and sensitivity of their own leadership. Their board underwent trainings. They conducted interviews with former leaders. They spent time discussing and planning how their mission was serving diverse communities. And they moved from thinking in terms of the way that people of color needed to be trained to realizing that they themselves needed training. Now they're considering their brand and their messaging, and they're creating a strategic plan that includes partnering with diverse communities. So to link effectively with diverse communities, we need to take off our blindfold and put on our equity lenses. Equity lenses help us to recognize disparities and to judge whether our actions promote equitable outcomes. And I had to do this for my own program. The Sustainable Ag and Food Systems portfolio was the least diverse, and our foundation has a mission of creating a more environmentally sustainable and socially just, world. And in order to do that, we believe that everybody should be involved, right? That when we try to seek out organizations led by people of color and working in low-income communities. So there were reasons why my program wasn't so diverse, but those reasons didn't justify the lack of diversity. They just helped explain it. With support from our board, we took a hard look at our grant-making guidelines and agreed that they needed to be changed in order for us to reach our goal of supporting a broad and inclusive social change movement. We basically ended up changing some of our criteria where we used to not fund at a local level, and most people of color-led organizations were working on that local level. So our board agreed to make an exception to our funding approach that now allows us to fund locally when the group is led by people of color and they're connecting their leadership to the broader food justice and sustainable agriculture movement by participating in coalitions and networks. And in that way, we're not only increasing the diversity of our portfolio, but we're also building the leadership of the broader movement. So in closing, I'll just say, expect for there to be changes in what you do. It's not a straightforward process. Making the decision to link with diverse communities is the first step. You'll have to be clear about where you want to go. And once you take that first step, you may discover that what you thought was the best route was only one of several alternatives. You'll find unanticipated bumps in the road, but if you stay focused on your mission, stay flexible about your practice, and keep your equity lenses handy, you'll be pretty successful and hopefully you'll enjoy the process. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Kolu. That was wonderful. Karen and Owen together here. There are two Just Foodies. Karen Washington has lived in New York City all her life and has been a resident of the Bronx for over 25 years. Since 1985, Karen has been a community activist, striving to make the Bronx a better place to live. As a community gardener, Karen has worked with neighborhoods to turn empty lots into community gardens. As an advocate, she's stood up and spoken out for garden protection and preservation. As a member of the La Familia Verde Garden Coalition, she launched a city farms market, bringing garden fresh vegetables to her neighbors. Karen is a Just Food board member and a Just Food trainer, leading workshops on food growing and food justice to community gardeners all over the city. Karen is also the president of the New York City Community Garden Coalition, a group that was founded to preserve community gardens, and on the board of the New York Botanical Gardens. Professionally, Karen has been a physical therapist for over 30 years, and she continues to balance her professional life with community service. Owen Taylor began his work with Just Food as the chicken intern, researching and getting out the word about the legality and best practices of keeping chickens in New York City for eggs, education, and overall garden health. He became Just Food's training and livestock coordinator in February 2007, now coordinating the training of trainers, a training for community gardeners to develop their participatory workshop skills, community workshops, a series of gardening and food justice workshops in New York City led by community gardeners, and city chicken projects, community and school gardeners keeping chickens to increase food security, and you'll hear about those shortly. So Karen and Owen, take it away.
Hi, everybody. So my first slide. Hi, so that's me. I'm Karen Washington. I'm an urban farmer. I tell people I grow food. I feed people body and mind. That's me there in my community garden. I say I grow the best collard greens nationwide. I also say that growing your own food gives you a sense of power. It gives you dignity. You know exactly what you're eating because you grew it. It's good. It's nourishing. And you did this for yourself, your family, and your community. I grew up in the Lower East Side, in the projects, as a matter of fact. And a lot of people ask me, how does a person who grew up in the projects become an urban farmer? And I've been doing this now over 20 years. And I think I always had something in me when, in terms of relationship to food and the land. And I had a chance to really hone my skills when I moved to the Bronx back in 1985. And it was a direct result of what was happening in the early 70s and 80s when most of the Bronx, Brooklyn, and Manhattan saw a sort of shift where a lot of the middle class, they called it white flight, leaving the city and going into the suburbs. And so what you saw basically was a migration of people leaving, and as a result what was happening is that you saw abandoned buildings, and a lot of these abandoned buildings were torched, and as a result you saw row houses, abandoned buildings, and vacant lots. And so if you look at this picture, I live across the street, and so I said to myself, I moved to the Bronx to get a piece of the American dream, and when I looked across the dream, it was my American nightmare. And so there was two things that people in the community who could not leave can do. Either you sit back and you allow it to happen, or you galvanize people in the community and you do something. And what I try to tell people is that when you live near garbage, if you live near a sewer plant or an incinerator, people have a tendency to think that you are garbage, and we're not garbage. And so groups of people throughout the city got together and started turning these empty lots into community gardens. And it was a direct response, basically, really to get a lot of people off the street. What was happening was that a lot of children were playing in the streets. They were really finding no access to land, and so they had to come together and do something. And so, as you can see this picture here, this is a picture that you saw regionally, and it was a direct reference to the next picture. Again, getting kids off the street. The only way that we could, in terms, have access to water was to use the hydrants. A lot of the kids, as you can see here, played in the streets. A lot of the adults had no place to go but hang out on the stoops. Also, it was a direct sort of response to really balancing the concrete jungle that we were being surrounded by and trying to turn that empty lot into this beautiful community garden. And that's the Garden of Happiness now. And as a result, you can see the pride and dignity that happens when communities get together excuse me, and turn something that is basically blight, basically despair, and turn it into something that's empowering and full of hope. Now, if you look at this next slide, community gardens, what a wonderful slide. You can see community gardens throughout the city really bringing beautification. And as a result, you look at it, there is an air of complacency. And something had to change for community gardens now to be at the forefront of urban ag as is today. And that happened back in 1999 when the Giuliani administration wanted to turn these gorgeous community gardens up for auction. And so the whole dynamic of the community garden movement in New York City changed from community gardens to community activists. Because we were told, you can't fight City Hall, but in fact we did. And we did this by doing protests. We galvanized people in the community and started voter registration, workshops, really signing up people to register to vote. We took people to our local politicians, to our council people. We knocked on doors. We went to community boards. And as a result, at that time, Attorney General Eliot Spitzer heard what was happening and put an injunction against the city and said what the mayor was doing was wrong. And as a result, the city came up with an agreement, which expires this year, that saved the 100 community gardens. Now, there are over 500 community gardens citywide. Most of them have been transferred from HPD, which is Housing Preservation Development, into Parks and Recreation. Those hundreds that were up for auction, half went to TPL, which is Trust for Public Land, and the other half went to Restoration Project, which is sponsored by Bette Midler's group. So as a result, you have a new form of community gardeners who are now becoming community activists. The next sort of wave that community gardens got involved is not only in terms of activism, but also looking at the dynamics food has in the community. And that is looking at health and nutrition. Health and nutrition. Health and nutrition. And so what you want to look at here, and the next slide, stop right here, the slide right here, is the fact that in low-income neighborhoods and neighborhoods of color, there's a problem. We are surrounded by junk food. We are surrounded by a lot of healthy bodegas. And the response is, well, you can't grow vegetables in New York City. And this slide shows, indeed, you can grow vegetables. It also signifies the importance that people, especially grassroots people, have to have in terms of taking back their community. Right now, you're hearing a lot of word about sustainability, urban ag, and that cannot happen unless people who feel marginalized are at the forefront of the decision-making process. If you look at a lot of nonprofits across the board and people who have the intent of doing something great, we're not at the table. People of color, we're not at the table. And so in order for us to talk about urban agriculture and sustainability, we have to be there. We have high incidence of childhood obesity, asthma, a lot of health-related problems such as diabetes and heart disease, but we're not at the table. And so when we talk about urban agriculture and sustainability, what does that look like? And it has to be from the bottom up instead of from the top down. A lot of my white allies ask exactly what could they do to benefit communities of color, and I say this to them. I say, come into the community with open arms. Come into the community not bringing your ideas, but asking exactly what the community wants. Bring in information that will help the community and bring in information that will empower the communities. Right now, community gardens across the city, and not only across the city, but nationwide, are really trying to take back their communities and really explaining to the powers that be that there are other solutions. There are other solutions that have to be carried out by the community at large. Community gardens are resource centers. We do a lot of workshops in our community gardens. We provide a safe haven. And I think one of the most important things that we do is educate children. Right now, we're in a crisis. As our elders retire and move on, we have a new generation of children that are coming up not knowing where their food is coming from. If you ask a typical kid from New York City, where does a tomato come from? Where are you getting your carrots? They're going to tell you from the store. So how do we then sort of break this cycle of the health problems that we're having? And the only way we can do that is through education. And community gardens provide that. We also provide chickens, and this is something new, and I think Owen will go into, livestock. That's something new. And that also provides an education piece of attaching the environment, growing plants with food. And chickens add a dynamic really to the food system. We also have something that just came up and was, thanks to Just Food and a lot of people, bees. And bees are very important. And, you know, people ask why. Because without bees, we can't have food, because bees do pollinate. And so by having chickens and bees, this all plays into the education process of growing food. And I think, as I said before, the most dynamic aspect of urban agriculture and gardening are these kids right here, our future farmers. Getting kids really involved in knowing where their food comes from, really getting them into playing in the dirt as a good thing, and also having them understand that the food that they eat is a strong correlation to their health, that they don't have to rely on the fast food and the junk food that you normally see in our neighborhoods. I can tell you that within my neighborhood that fast foods outnumber medical centers, hospitals, and healthy foods combined. And so it's very important that at this point in time, we must get children involved in this movement. I always say about children is that there are future leaders, there are future farmers, and that they have to play a critical part in this movement. Next slide, please. And to look at the eyes to a child, if you look at the faces on these children, the curiosity, they're intrigued at what they're doing. And this is what we want to encourage kids around the city to do, to ask questions about where their food comes from so that they can be our future leaders and our future farmers. This next slide is very important because it's our farmers market. It's the La Familia Verde Farmers Market. And it was started 6 years ago. And it was started because people said to us that people in low-income neighborhoods and neighborhoods of color did not want fresh produce. And so as growers, who better than community gardeners should get together and start farmers market? So the first thing we did was do a survey to ask if that was important. And of course, we got 99% yes that community wanted a farmers market. Our farmers market has 5 community gardens. We have 2 farmers on site, and we have 2 farmers that we pick up from. Next slide, please. At our farmers market, we encourage our youth farmers, which is very important. I think that's the next slide. And last but not least, the most important aspect of the community garden movement is activism. It's important that we continue our work, that we are at the table, and that we are at the front lines instead of the sidelines. Owen, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Karen. Okay, hello, this is Owen. Kind of tying it into where Karen left off, Karen talked about the community gardening movement, and when Just Food formed, that was in full swing, a vibrant community garden movement of gardeners with agricultural knowledge, with organizing skills. And we had to think, how can we best support this movement? People who are growing food, people who are creating community spaces that are so important. And so we began in 1995 with people who were watching as sustainable farming movement was kind of taking off, and at the same time we're losing farmland. And that there were people in New York City who were very hungry and food insecure. There wasn't access to healthy food, and there still is not in many neighborhoods of New York City. And so we combined those issues to do some work to address them. We worked to build a just and sustainable food system in the New York City region. We have 5 programs, and very briefly, we have a community-supported agriculture program where we connect New York City community groups with farmers to get a weekly share of vegetables during the growing season, paying money up front. We have a Fresh Food for All program where we connect farmers to food pantries in New York City, local farmers to food pantries. Community food education is leading workshops for communities at our farmers markets, at CSA drop-off points, at food pantries, teaching people how to prepare and eat healthy and nutritious food. The Food Justice Program is an advocacy program where we both lobby to improve the food system. For example, we helped to legalize the honey beekeeping a couple months ago. And we also teach people how to be advocates to improve their local community food systems. Finally, the City Farms Program is my program that I work with. I do want to mention on this slide that we are a mostly white organization. Our staff is mostly white and our board is mostly white. So the City Farms Program is working to increase the amount of food grown and distributed in New York City. We began in the late 90s with this program and started out as service providers. Well, first of all, we have 4 programs, and they're the Training of Trainers program, the Community Workshops program, the Market Development project, and the City Chicken project. In the next slide, you'll see a quote from Abu Talib from Taqwa Community Farm. And he says, once we get to the next slide, I'll tell you, well, I actually know it. He who controls his food system controls his, he who controls your breadbasket controls your destiny. And this is a quote that reflects the philosophy of many people who we work with, many of the community groups. And so it's a group, the groups that we work with are groups in food insecure communities, food deserts, who are looking to take back some of the control of their food system. And we have to think, how can we use our resources as a nonprofit? How can we use our resources to build up communities' control of their food system? As I said, we started providing services. We did technical assistance in these gardens, which are mostly in Bronx and Brooklyn, but all around the city. And we also provided material support, soil, seeds, etc. At that time, most workshops in the city and consultations were led by staff members, Just Food staff, and Cornell Cooperative Extension staff, staff of other organizations, and but primarily by the one Cornell Cooperative Extension agent. And he helped us to think carefully, how can we have a broader reach? And so with Heifer International, we started a training of trainers program. Before I go into that, I just want to mention this picture was taken by National Geographic. A very side note, they called me looking to interview a family who's keeping chickens, because the backyard chicken movement is so huge right now. And I try as much as possible to promote the community projects that we work with rather than backyard gardeners, just to highlight the way that people are taking back control of their food system, not for themselves only, but also for their whole communities. That was a side note. But the training of trainers was a response to trying to broaden our impact, and also have those who are giving workshops reflect the communities that we work with. The training of trainers is a 2-day workshop where we teach community garden leaders, I also like to say superstars, in how to lead hands-on participatory workshops. They already have agricultural skills, whether that's because they migrated here from the South from agricultural traditions, or from other countries, or they've been growing food in New York City for a few decades, or they're young people with a passion for growing food. They come through the training and learn how people learn, and how then to lead workshops in ways that touch on various learning styles, hands-on, participatory, kind of like popular education style, dialogue-based as well. So after the 2-day workshop, they then go through a series of 9 workshops in the field. You'll see at the bottom people doing seed starting workshops at the Oasis, and also a pest management workshop. So since 2002, we've now have 28 trainers. 16 of them were very active last year. They're all community gardeners teaching garden workshops on various topics. We've started using the same curriculum, adapted a little bit, for our community chefs who lead cooking demos and nutrition workshops. This one recent update is that we did a training of trainers at East New York Farms this winter, and we asked one of our trainers who's gone through the program to teach it with us. In the past, it's been Heifer International staff and Just Food staff, and we're moving now in the direction of having all of the TOTs, training of trainers, led by both staff and Just Food trainers who are community gardeners, as a way to do professional development, and also because we have different teaching styles, we have different experience, it really adds to the depth of the training. In the next slide, community workshops. The community workshops are led by the Just Food trainers. We teach 40 to 50 workshops throughout the year, all led by community gardeners, on propagation, soils, pruning, season extension, seed saving, anything you can think of in terms of helping people learn to grow more food in New York City. You'll see in this slide when we get to it, right there, oh, back one, that there on the top left is Classy Parker leading a workshop on canning, food preservation. On the top right, Eric Toman in the green shirt leading a workshop on season extension. On the bottom left, Janette Fleming leading a workshop, and she's in the pink, on medicinal herbs. And in the bottom right, Greg Anderson, who's sawing, leading a workshop on cold frames. These workshops now in the city are led mostly by community gardeners. Years ago, if you looked at the programs for yearly conferences on community gardening, they were led by staff of organizations. And now the majority of them are led by community gardeners themselves, and many of them are just food trainers. It's an opportunity for our trainers to get professional development and also advance their careers. Classy Parker, who's leading the canning demo, now travels the country to give canning demonstrations, which she may have done anyway because she was already leading canning workshops, but this has given her more exposure and confidence and also a network that has supported her work. Eric Toman in the top right now is teaching a class at New School, maybe the first community gardening class at a college. And they had called me looking for an instructor, and again I recommended talking to our trainers, a community gardener, to lead that. So it's a way for people to get professional development. If Just Food was gone tomorrow, these trainers would still be leading workshops, and that's one way we look at the success of the program. In the next slide, the City Farms Market Program, as Karen mentioned, came out of her garden coalition actually asking us to help start a farmer's market. Her garden coalition is the La Familia Verde Community Garden Coalition, and this is their farmers market. And we work with groups that are strong and have a passion and commitment and the ability to run their own markets. We do not run any of our city farms markets. Last year we had 11 that we worked with. This year we have 14. And we help with technical assistance, also with insurance, collective insurance buying. And a lot of the technical assistance, or most of it, is given between market managers themselves, many of whom are Just Food trainers. So Karen will go and give workshops at other markets that are just starting up to help them figure out how to make it successful. Let's see, the next slide, City Chickens, the City Chicken Project. This is similar. We work with groups that are strong and organized and can run the projects themselves. And we work with groups that are focused on food justice and feeding their communities. So we have an application process. And when we give workshops to new groups, the workshops are now led by Just Food trainers. And when I began as a chicken intern, I led most of the chicken workshops. I was someone who had worked on several farms and helped peripherally with chickens, but now, luckily, the workshops are led by community gardeners who actually keep chickens in their community gardens in New York City. So I wanted to, oops, went back to the last slide. Let's see the timing. I'm going to pass it along too. I would like to ask Karen what it would look like, what it looks like when we are successful in working with communities, just briefly.
So I always tell Owen that if you look at your board and your board looks the same, then there's something wrong. If you, in your mission statement, your vision statement, say that you are in there to empower people of color, and you have been doing this 10 or 15 years, then there's something wrong, because those people that you said that you were empowered should be on your board and running the organization.
Great. Since we're over time, I want to pass it on to the next presenter.
Thanks.
We do have some great questions coming in, and we will get to them at the end, but I do want to move on to Diana Copeland, who is the Executive Director for East Michigan Environmental Action Council. She has an extensive background in environmental justice advocacy, environmental project management, and community organizing. Mrs. Copeland earned her BS in Environmental Science and Tribal Natural Resource Policy at the Evergreen State College, Watershed Management at University of Washington program in Streamside Studies, and her MS in Environmental Justice at the University of Michigan. She worked in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, connecting community leaders to solve environmental and health challenges in Rio's favelas, which are autonomous communities, before coming to East Michigan Environmental Action Council. She's been very active in forming coalitions between environmental organizations, community and environmental justice groups to win environmental justice and health victories. Karen? Sorry, Diana.
Okay. So I'll be speaking from my own experience working on food security and environmental justice issues in Detroit, Michigan. The focus of our new initiative is to establish a model aquaponics demo site. with one of our partner schools, Ensorma Institute. We're using what we found as to be best practices in our current programs that make collaborations and partnerships work. East Michigan Environmental Action Council, or EMEAC, works primarily with the Detroit area community members and youth to build their leadership skills to become environmental justice advocates and environmental activists in their own communities. We currently have 4 main initiatives, and all of our current initiatives started organically by asking youth and community members what type of programs they wanted to see in their community, what was the biggest concern to them. Overwhelmingly, a concern was the state of the education, access to policymakers, as well as skill building. So our Stand Up, Speak Out initiative equips youth with the knowledge, tools, and skills they need to effectively advocate for public policies that improve environmental quality in Detroit. The Remedia program is a skill building program. There's a lot of interest around media and media making. It's an initiative in environmental literacy, which focuses on documenting environmental injustices and solutions. Remedia integrates environmental education, multimedia production, green technologies, social networking, and social consciousness as a means to trigger systemic change on individual and social levels. Our Greener Schools initiative creates environmental labs and participatory design outdoor classrooms in the Detroit Public Schools and takes a holistic approach to addressing the environmental health in communities' children by focusing on neighborhood schools. Supported by EMEAC staff members, the labs are taught by community environmental fellows, which is our 4th initiative, often community stipended or VISTA volunteers who are also community residents, are trained in a variety of organizing and reskilling methods, and in this case, to deliver Greener Schools curriculum in the classroom. The goal of the school-based programming is to increase student awareness of and connection to the natural world around their school and connect young people more strongly to their school and community. Now in this picture is an environmental lab on the west side of Detroit in the University District. Sana, who's in the middle in red, is a community environmental fellow from the neighborhood, and here she's leading the students in a xylem phloem transportation system dance of vascular plants for their biology lesson. And she learned this lesson during a one-week intensive environmental education training led by EMEAC. The Detroit Public Schools are pocket-marked with empty classrooms. Many of the students who haven't fled aren't getting much environmental science instruction, so this is a real attempt to respirit and revitalize the neighborhood schools using these multicultural environmental arts and science labs. There's space for nutrition, gardening, microscope, environmental monitoring, equipment storage, as well as leadership and civic engagement trainings. This picture was taken at the beginning of the year at the Ensorma Environmental Lab, and Angel, the Ensorma Community Environmental Fellow. The Ensorma Lab focuses on food security, and we're working together to create a food security curriculum. The Community Environmental Fellows Initiative provides skill building and entrepreneurship for community members who work within our programs and builds new community economic opportunities. The initiative also provides some economic security for community members as the fellows receive a stipend during their participation. And we've also had fellows that have actually moved up in the organization, and our associate director and our current leader of the environmental schools, of the Greener Schools coordination were past community environmental fellows, and some have started interning with other environmental groups. Through these programs, EMEAC seeks to address the environmental justice issues such as poor air quality, the lack of access to fresh and healthy foods that impact the public health of our community, and primarily Detroit's lower income communities. To address new skill building for youth and community members, we have engaged in an endeavor with Ensorma Institute to create this model aquaponics demonstration site at the school that will be operated by the students and the community members. The aquaponics model is replicable, financially self-sustainable after we figure about 3 years, that will grow tilapia and fresh lettuce and herbs. The idea is that some of the profits generated by the one site will be used to invest in replicating sites. So we're sponsoring the project in partnership with Ensorma Institute, and the idea is that the Institute would then take over the project and so forth as it moves on. And the other community collaborators that we're working with are the Evolution Community Kitchen, Brother Nature, and the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network. The demonstration site will be operated by a community fellow at the NSORMA community. EMEAC is very proactive about our collaborations to make them successful, devising common principles that we work from and refer back to as for accountability of all partners in the collaboration. We practice open communication, especially around fundraising and our own organizational budget. EMEAC's organizational work is based on environmental justice principles, and we first go into meetings to discuss a potential collaboration opportunity with other groups. We use this as a reference point, and then from there often devise our own set of organizing principles that are specific to the task at hand. During the first few meetings, we set up meeting guidelines, a facilitation cohort, and a collaborative decision-making process. The Detroit Model Aquaponics project will raise tilapia and perch in conjunction with vegetables and serve as a local and national showcase for community and ecology-based solutions to food insecurity at the United States Social Forum, which will be in Detroit this summer, June 22nd. And it's developed in collaboration with local leaders, and the facility will act as an educational and community center to be used by the community. Most importantly, the project can provide fresh fish that are pollution-free and vegetables to the residents, and a much-needed cooperative element and helpfulness to the city. In aquaponics, the system of hydroponics and aquaculture are combined to grow plants and fish together in one integrated system. Aquaponics is actually a complete ecosystem unto itself, where both plants and fish thrive with no waste being thrown off to pollute the Earth's ecosystem. For students of all ages, it demonstrates various principles taught in technology. The life cycle of plants, the structure of plants, how to make effective use of recycled materials, low-tech, high-tech yield gardening, ecological issues, and sustainable farming. The main drive will be in educating the students in self-sufficiency, and in doing so, also growing healthy vegetables and fish. The aquaponics demonstration site is a natural extension of our Greener Schools outdoor classroom design program, which is a critical component of our Greener Schools environmental lab. The community environmental fellows work with the students and landscape architects. Right now we're working with the University of Michigan to transform school grounds into outdoor classrooms for science methodology and intellectual exploration. School grounds offer great pedagogical potential through hands-on and minds-on involvement in designing, creating, caring for, and using school's natural areas. Children stand to improve their academic performance and develop a willingness and capacity to work for the good of human and natural communities for which they are part by engaging in these outdoor activities. Metalwork, woodwork, and art students can also be involved when it comes to helping to design and build the actual aquaponics system. It gives students an opportunity to use design software and then to realize their designs and evaluate them themselves. The participatory design process for students, teachers, and community members for the outdoor classroom has already lent itself well for the Model Aquaponics project. The same lead team that created the NSORMA outdoor plan has created several possible designs for the ponds and greenhouses for the aquaponics project. One is a standalone site, one inside an abandoned home next to a school, one is an attached greenhouse on the outside of the school, and then settling on the courtyard space right in the center of the building. Some of the fish tanks will be raised so that they may be viewed by students through the classroom windows. The participatory design process creates ownership and investment by the community from the start. NSORMA Institute is often described as a school, but in reality is a community-based learning center. The leader of that school is Malika Keeney, who guides the school with a cultural and spiritual approach. One of the the first picture when I was showing on community empowerment was actually taken, or the last two pictures, during the inside the NSORMA gym during a welcome for an environmental and place-based educational training for a collective of area schools. So the Greener Schools Community Environmental Fellows Program and Aquaponics Project are all part of a larger food security vision for the city. Since last October, there have been a serious movement that's working towards a community food security plan and the creation of a Detroit Food Justice Task Force. While abandoned by major supermarket chains, Detroit, like many inner city communities, has a rich social and environmental capital that has been largely untapped and greatly underutilized in addressing food security for the people of the community. So these are several pictures of key partners. Angela has some of her delicious looking food from the Detroit Community Kitchen, and there's also Joe Riley working with a student at the American Indian Health and Family Services. So this task force would be forming an on-the-ground team of Detroiters that will address the research and informational needs of the Detroit agricultural community and for the Detroit Food Policy Council as they relate to the creation of business plans and the planning and implementation of urban agriculture and related endeavors. The end goal is a strategy and implementation for a community-owned food production and distribution model consisting of a network of self-organized neighborhood food justice groups, connecting their gardens, aquaponics systems, farms, local businesses, community kitchens, schools, and hospitals. A demonstration aquaponics site will be set up at NSORMA during the United States Social Forum, and the Food Justice Work Brigade will be spending some time helping with its operation. The next step would be then commercial scale facilities that will also be established, and we are working with a variety of partners, including the Restaurant Opportunity Center, which is going to have a restaurant and training site within a warehouse in downtown. So both of these projects have great job generating and job training components. And also during the social forum there will be a food justice tour that will be happening and going by some of these sites. So thank you very much for this opportunity to share our experience.
Thank you, Diana. I just, sitting and listening to Karen, Owen, and Diana, it strikes me that getting participation in the planning and implementation pieces of the process really creates that ownership of the project. But I really want to give a sincere thanks to all of our presenters, Karen Washington, Owen Taylor, Diana Copeland, and Kolu Zigbi for a fascinating and wide-ranging presentation. I also want to thank the Community Food Security Coalition for their sponsorship of and assistance in arranging this webinar. The National Good Food Network webinars are the third Thursday each month at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time. All of our webinars are archived and accessible on the web. ngfn.org is the URL. Our next webinar is the third Thursday of June, June 17. Topic is School Food Focus, a partner organization with the NGFN. The presentation will include the great work that Focus does in Farm to School in larger school districts. In addition to learning what Focus itself does and what services they provide, there will be one or two illustrative and inspiring case studies to learn from. Because School Food Focus directs its attention to the larger school districts, it's a nice complement to this webinar's look at metropolitan areas. The next Community Food Security Coalition sponsored webinar is July 15th, where you learn how to build support from local governments to forward your efforts in getting more good food into the food system. To register for these webinars, visit that same page, ngfn.org/webinars. We also have a growing archive of all the NGFN webinars, recordings, slides, written Q&A, and by the way, the questions that were answered in written form so far on this webinar will be posted along with the recording. So in case you missed them, and there are some very complete answers, and I thank our presenters for that. The webinar should be up within a few business days. I want to encourage you to participate in one of the 4 agriculture and carbon markets making carbon count regional workshops put on by NGFN Advisory Council members of the Sustainable Food Lab. Agriculture has the opportunity to play a major role in addressing the challenge of climate change. There's financial incentives for farmers to, quote, produce emissions reductions or sequester carbon to help unleash this potential. There will be a series of workshops, a lot of interactive stuff. We strongly suggest you go. There's 4 and the dates are up there on your screen. The NGFN wants to keep you updated on the latest in the rapidly moving food safety domain. Every second Tuesday of the month, we have a food safety conference call led by our food safety coordinator, and anyone is welcome to join in. It's at 3:30 p.m. Eastern, 12:30 p.m. Pacific. Call-in number is posted a few days before at that URL, ngfn.org/foodsafety. At that same web address, you'll find lots of useful documents, including a food safety FAQ to get you up to speed on all the technical terminology you're likely to hear. There are monthly written updates, and we're excited to launch a new series of interviews today with some of the people closest to this issue. Today is the first. Brian Snyder, Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Association for Sustainable Agriculture, PASA, is up now. If you go to ngfn.org/foodsafety. Also, Tony Corbo, Senior Lobbyist for the food campaign at Food and Water Watch, will be in a week or so. We will be posting others, also ngfn.org/foodsafety. You can find the National Good Food Network on YouTube, Twitter, our website. I'd like to encourage you to add your name, interests, your bio, and other information to our growing database of people, organizations, and funders. Marty mentioned this at the beginning. This helps to increase your ability to connect to people within your regions and nationally. Look for the database link in the resources section of our site. And if you haven't already, sign up for our email updates. There's a link on the ngfn.org homepage. Please contact us anytime. contact@ngfn.org. And the NGFN would like to thank you for your time, your extended time today. And let me encourage you once again to fill out the survey that will open in your web browser in a moment. Take care, and we'll see you next month.